Welcome to Quickcasters, everybody. We're only 4 days away from the big one of the 2024 U.S. presidential election, and wow, the energy's electric.
It really is. I mean, the intensity of this race is something else. Candidates are running all over the place, rallies are packed, and it feels like everyone in the country is glued to the news.
Absolutely, a real nail-biter. With Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump locked in a race that's way too close to call. And that's what we're diving deep into today, their backgrounds, campaigns, what's at stake, in this historic election.
And you hit the nail on the head with historic. I mean, just imagine the possibilities. Harris could become a first female Black Indian American president, shattering glass ceilings everywhere.
It's a truly groundbreaking possibility. But then again, we can see the return of Donald Trump, a figure who needs no introduction.
Yeah.
He would be the first president elected after a criminal conviction.
No matter what, folks, this election is going down in the history books. So strap in because we are about to unpack all of it.
Okay, so let's get down to business. Kamala Harris, our current vice president, she stepped into the race after President Biden decided against a second term. And she's done a pretty impressive job of unifying the Democratic Party. A lot of people see her as the face of a new generation of politicians.
And she's been very focused on certain issues, like reproductive rights, protecting our democracy and tackling that cost of living that never seems to go away. It's all part of her strategy to win over those centrist voters, the ones who could swing the election.
It's a smart strategy for sure, especially with all the dissatisfaction with Trump among moderate voters. But, inheriting the baggage of the Biden administration, particularly when it comes to immigration and the economy, that's a challenge you can't just ignore.
Oh, for sure. Biden's approval ratings have been stuck around 45%. And, those economic worries, especially with inflation still on everybody's minds, that could definitely hurt her. It makes you wonder if she'll be able to get the same level of enthusiasm from certain voter groups, like those Arab American voters in Michigan. They were really energized by Biden, but will they feel the same way about Harris?
That's the big question. Can Harris get voters as fired up as Biden did? We'll see. But for now, let's shift gears and talk about the Republican nominee, a man who needs no introduction, Donald Trump.
Right, the former president. He's really emphasizing his experience. He keeps reminding voters about all the things he accomplished in his first term, the tax cuts he put in place, and his appointment of those conservative Supreme Court justices.
And of course, we can't forget about his base, those fiercely loyal supporters. They are fired up and ready to see him back in the Oval Office. And his campaign is like a repeat of his first one, laser focused on the economy, hammering away at inflation and immigration, the things that really hit home for a lot of Americans.
Yeah, and you can't underestimate the power of familiarity in a race this close. I mean, he's been there, he's done that, he knows how to get his base excited. And with the economy being such a major concern for a lot of people, it could actually work in his favor.
But here's the thing. The big elephant in the room that nobody seems to want to talk about, the turmoil that surrounded the end of his presidency. The 2020 election disputes the January 6th Capitol riot, his recent criminal conviction. I mean, that's a lot of baggage for any candidate.
Yeah, it really makes you think, will his base stick with him despite all of this? Or will it push some voters, even Republicans, away? That's the million-dollar question.
It creates a really interesting dynamic. It's almost like we're seeing two different Donald Trumps in this election. One is the experienced leader promising to make America great again, and the other is this controversial figure who some people see as a real threat to democracy.
A real clash of narratives, for sure. But when you get right down to it, this election is going to come down to those key swing states, those battlegrounds, where neither candidate has a clear advantage.
Exactly. We're talking about states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. These are the states that can make or break it for either candidate. Every single vote will matter in those places.
And that's where voter demographics become so important. We know that Harris tends to get more support from women and minority groups, but can she match the kind of enthusiasm that Biden generated? Only time will tell.
And on the other side, Trump's base is still mostly white and male, but he's been trying to connect with Latino voters, which could be a big deal in places like Florida and Arizona.
Yeah.
It's going to be a real demographic tug of war.
No doubt about it. Whoever wins this election, it's going to be the candidate who can fire up their base and win over those undecided voters in those key states. It's going to be a close one, folks.
We've been talking about the candidates, their backgrounds, and just how much this election could change things. But now let's get into the stuff that really matters, the issues.
Right, the meat and potatoes of the campaign, the things that are on voters' minds, and the things that are going to decide who runs the country for the next 4 years.
It's like a mix of the same old problems and a bunch of new challenges, all coming to a head at the same time.
For sure. And of course, the one thing that everyone seems to be talking about is the economy.
Inflation? It's been a real problem for Biden and Harris and Trump. You know, he's not letting anyone forget it.
He's been hitting that point hard, saying he's the only one who can bring back the good times we had when he was in office.
Promising tax cuts, less regulation. You know, the classic Republican stuff. They think it will jumpstart the economy and put more money in people's pockets.
Yeah, but Harris is pushing back. She says Trump's policies only help the rich. She's all about making things easier for working families.
Like expanding the child tax credit, making childcare more affordable. Things that will give people some relief, especially with prices going up everywhere.
It's a real clash of economic ideas, and it's something that voters are really thinking about. You know, every time they go to the grocery store or fill up their gas tank, they feel it.
And speaking of hot-button issues, we can't forget about immigration.
Oh, yeah. The Biden-Harris administration has been taking a lot of heat for how they've handled the border. You know, with so many migrants trying to come into the U.S.
And Trump is definitely using that to his advantage.
Yeah.
He's saying he'll go back to his tough stance on illegal immigration. You know, build the wall and all that.
But Harris says she wants a more compassionate approach. You know, one that looks at why people are leaving Central America in the first place.
It's a tough issue, for sure. And there's so much emotion and politics tied up in it. It's a big deal for voters, especially in those states along the border.
Right. And then there's abortion, which has become an even bigger issue since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade.
Harris is 100% pro-choice. She's promised to fight for abortion rights at the federal level if she's elected.
But Trump appointed the conservative judges who overturned Roe. And he's not shy about wanting to restrict abortion access if he gets a second term.
It's a major dividing line.
Yeah.
And it's getting voters fired up on both sides. It's almost like this election is a vote on whether women should have the right to choose.
You know, and we can't forget about climate change. That's something that younger voters really care about.
Harris has made it a central part of her campaign. She wants to invest in clean energy and cut back on carbon emissions.
But Trump, he's questioned climate science in the past. And when he was president, he rolled back a lot of environmental regulations.
It's like a clash between generations. You know, young people want to see action on climate change, but some older voters are more worried about the economy.
And then there's the war in Ukraine. You know, what's America's role in the world going to be?
Harris has been very clear about supporting Ukraine, you know, sending them military aid and humanitarian assistance.
But Trump's position has been a little harder to pin down. Sometimes he praises Putin, and sometimes he says the U.S. shouldn't be so involved.
It just goes to show that even in an election where everyone's talking about domestic issues, foreign policy still matters.
So yeah, there's a lot on the line in this election. The economy, immigration, abortion, climate change, foreign policy.
It's a lot for voters to consider. You know, when they go to the polls, they're going to have to think about all of these things and decide which candidate they trust to deal with them.
It's not just about choosing between Harris and Trump. It's about what kind of country we want to live in.
What we value and what we want the future to look like.
The stakes are high. There's no doubt about it.
It's going to be a wild ride all the way to the finish line. We've talked about the candidates. We've dug into the issues. Now it's time to look ahead. It's prediction time.
And let me tell you, it is going to be a close one. The polls are showing a dead heat between Harris and Trump. We're talking razor-thin margins here, folks. It's going to be a photo finish.
It all comes down to a handful of states. Those battleground states where either candidate could win, those electoral votes, they're the golden ticket to the White House.
All right, so let's break down these battleground states. Pennsylvania, always a big one, 20 electoral votes. Trump barely won it in 2016, then Biden flipped it back in 2020 this time. Who knows?
Then there's Michigan, another state that's always a nail-biter, 16 electoral votes up for grabs, and both campaigns are fighting tooth and nail for them. Remember, Trump won it in 2016, then it swung back to the Democrats in 2020. Could we see another flip?
And don't forget Wisconsin, 10 electoral votes, and another state that could go either way. Trump surprised a lot of people by winning it in 2016, but then Biden took it back 4 years later. This year, it's anyone's guess.
And of course, we can't forget about Arizona.
Yeah.
11 electoral votes. That could be the deciding factor. It usually leans Republican, but it's getting more and more competitive. The growing Latino population there could give Harris an edge, but Trump's appeal to working class voters is still strong.
It's interesting to see how demographics are changing the political map in these key states. It's a reflection of how America is evolving and the struggles we're facing as a nation.
But ultimately, it all comes down to who shows up to vote. You know, getting people to the polls, making their voices heard. That's what's going to decide this election.
Absolutely. Both campaigns are going all out. Huge rallies, door-to-door, canvassing tons of advertising. It's nonstop.
It's a real pressure cooker. But in the middle of all the chaos, let's take a step back and think about the bigger picture. This election isn't just about Republicans versus Democrats or Trump versus Harris.
It's about something much bigger. It's about where our country is headed,
Sure.
what we stand for, what kind of future we want for ourselves and for our kids.
And as we stand on the edge of this historic election, we want to hear from you. So head down to the comments section and let us know, who do you think will win? What are the issues that matter most to you in this election?
Share your thoughts. Join the conversation. Your voice matters. This is your democracy, and we all have a role to play in shaping it.
Well, folks, that wraps up our deep dive into the 2024 election. It's been a wild ride, and we've barely scratched the surface. But as we sign off, we want to leave you with this thought.
Regardless of the outcome, no matter who wins, the real work starts on November 6th. The work of healing the divisions in our country, finding common ground, and moving forward together.
Because at the end of the day, we're all Americans. We're all in this together, and it's up to all of us to create a better future. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Stay engaged, stay informed, and most importantly, stay hopeful.